Get started. We'll call the February 21st, 2017 Council Committee meeting. Call it to order. Let's rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance real quick. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I've got a couple of things I would like to add before we get started here. I just wanted to mention really quickly, I received a nice packet in the mail today from the Commonwealth of Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, confirming that we did receive the $270,000 grant for the sidewalk on Dulwick. So that's great news. Good. Wanted to share that. And then also I wanted to turn the floor over to Jillian Travis, a student at Lloyd Memorial High School, who's organizing a, well, I'll let you tell us.
Hi, I'm Jillian. I'm a senior at Lloyd Memorial High School, and we are creating a necessity drive for homelessness as one of the topics that we were talking about. My teacher, Ms. Lloyd, said that, you know, it's a big topic in our community, and it's not really recognized because we don't see it that often. And we were going to donate necessity items to Build a Dream Foundation and the Mary Rose Mission, and that's about it.
Wonderful.
And if anyone wants a flyer, to either or. So.
Yeah, leave a couple flyers with us. Yeah. And tell us the dates of the drop-off again.
March 6th and March 16th. The drop-offs are at any time. All you have to do is go to Lloyd and drop it off at the office, and they will be picked up twice a day by any of the students. And if you have any questions, you call Ms. Lloyd at her at the school, and the extension's on your number, and the items will be donated.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thanks for doing that.
May I ask?
Yeah.
Julian, it's so funny that you should bring this up because I was just having a conversation in the police department last week about this very thing.
Patty, can you speak into the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just having the same conversation in the police department last week, talking about exactly the same thing. I even came up with a name for a program to help these homeless people. Preserving Pride, I thought would be a really great name. You're right. I don't think anybody has a clue how many homeless people we have in our area. They just don't even think about it.
Well, we were looking at statistics in class, and like, you know, when she was talking about it, everyone was like, well, I don't see a homeless man down the street, or I don't see a homeless man under a bridge, or stuff like that. And she was just saying, like, you don't have to see them. You just know that they're there.
That's right.
And that, you know, they're not always asking for help because we don't have that resources out here because we are such a small community, you know? So.
Right, right. Well, I think it's just wonderful. I think the need is critical, and anything we can do to help.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time and letting us know about it.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
Where do you want me to start?
You can say, I'll tell you. Yeah.
All right. So thank you. So we'll move on to the first item on the agenda, which is under administration. Renee or Kathy, did you want to talk about, oh no, I'm sorry, that's it. It was on there. Excuse me.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so under
for
Public
allowing
Works,
us to say something.
Mr. Cahill, Mr. Skidmore, the facilities assessment and firehouse location.
Yes, we have two guests tonight that we'd like to entertain to do the facilities assessment, just have a discussion with that, and then Mr. Meyer is going to talk about the work we did with the committee today. So.
This is Mr. Tim Murphy from Murphy Graves, or I guess it's Murphy Group now, isn't it? Changed names during this. This is the facility study that we commissioned last year. You all have a hard copy. If you didn't get a hard copy, get with me. Plus you have it electronically. And Mr. Murphy graciously agreed to be here tonight to go over this. And if you have any questions, please, now's the time to ask, okay? Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Happy to be here. What I want to do tonight was just do a very quick overview. You all have copies or electronic copies of this version of our report. Just very quickly, a little bit about the team that put this together. Again, I had an architecture firm out of Lexington and Louisville. I also brought in mechanical, electrical, and structural consultants to look at all the buildings. And then for the fire facilities in particular, brought in 2 consultants, one which is a planning consultant for fire facilities, and then a very specialized consultant that looks at fire station location and service areas. So that was the team that we put together to do the work that we're going to present tonight. There we go. We looked at these facilities here in the city, tried to look at everything and make sure that we had addressed all the specific buildings and needs that we have throughout the city. Now, the system that we used is 5 being the most critical, needs attention now, scaling down to 1, which is it'd be nice to do these elective upgrades when you had the money. The point I want to make here is that I'm currently doing similar facility assessments for a number of school districts throughout the state, for several courthouses, for the administrative office of the courts. And as I go through these facilities and look at them, the first thing I want you to know is that you all are doing an excellent job of maintaining your facilities, especially given the age of some of them. I was quite surprised, and you should be very pleased with the very low number of 5s that were found. And most of everything that we saw was in the 3 category. A few 4s that you ought to think about addressing here in the fairly near future. Oh, you're right. Thank you. So this building first, you all quite familiar with it, 21 years old, about 25,000 square feet. Had a little roof replacement done in 2014. As you look at the needs for this building, very few 4s, or no 5s whatsoever. The 4s have to do with things like improving air quality, ventilation in the fitness room, replace the chemical suppression room you have, system you have in your forensics lab, some step lighting and exterior envelope fixes, typical things that you would see of a building of this age. And those other 4s tend to have to do with codes changing over time, systems changing, and there are better ways to do things now than when the building was built. Other improvements in the category 3s, and I'm going to go through these quickly, but somebody wave me down because we have a lot of buildings to discuss if you have any specific questions. Most of these items really, oh, that won't show up there. On the 3s are, again, energy improvements, things that would be good to do just as good stewards of the public money when you have the opportunity. All the way down to low flow fixtures. We did address things like the wood panels out in the lobby that are starting to delaminate. So we tried to put cost to all of those things so you'll have a full scope of the things that need to be addressed. There was a request for about a 4,000 square foot addition at some point, so we did include that number there if you choose to do it. Thank you, Sherry.
Do we know who requested that?
I do not know. Came from...
No, I know it wasn't. You said it wasn't. We couldn't figure out who had requested that.
I believe it came from the police, but I can't tell you specifically. But am I throwing someone under the bus?
Yeah, you'd say.
Okay, all right then. Well, we'll try and run that down. I'll get that answer back to you, Mayor. Okay, thank you. The Park Museum project, again, I very rarely run into one where I say that the project is 139 years old, but there we go. 1,200 square feet. You had a little bit of renovation in '94 when you converted it to the museum space. I know you all are trying to decide, are you going to continue to have this facility? If you do, what are the things that you would do? If we were to make this and analyze this as a standalone facility for the long term, we'd look at things like emergency lighting that should be installed, egress, signage. The roof needs work, gutters and downspouts. One of the biggest issues, as you all know, is the little shed bathroom that you have out there, so making that accessible, replacing that at some point. If you think it's a long-term solution, you ought to think about doing that. And we've given you a number there if you want to take that piece down and just replace it. Something to consider. Here at the flagship park, the restroom building, it's fairly new. What was suggested to us was you would like to, if you could, make it sort of a four-season facility. So that would just need a little bit of work and install some temperature controls and fans. Some of the downspouts are kind of spilling on the sidewalks. It'd be great if we could pick that up, run it away, because in the wintertime, that's going to be a slippery surface for you. Increasing the site lighting there so you could do some outdoor concerts and events. Not too much here. It's a fairly new facility. Just a few things that you might want to consider in the long run. The Overlake Park restroom building. Again, this building is starting to get up there in age, and it's starting to show it. It's only about 600 square feet. It had some lighting upgrades a couple of years ago. Here, I think your dilemma is, are you going to continue to spend money on this facility versus do you just want to replace it? There are a number of things that you could do, again, in the sort of Category 3 area, installing freeze-proof drinking fountains, improving the ventilation, exhaust, temperature controls, and things like that. So for roughly $100,000, we could make improvements to this building. On the other hand, if you wanted to replace it, it's about twice that. So it's a tough one there. This one is starting to get where the renovation costs make me question whether you want to continue, but you have the information for either way. Your public works, we've got several buildings here on the site that have been around quite a while. You start to see all of them here. We're going to touch on a number of these as we go forward. On the site, there's some sanitary sewer and drainage work that we should do. Drainage is a big issue around this area. So you're going to hear me say that quite a lot. Probably ought to improve some site lighting as well. We'll start with Public Works Building number 1, about 40 years old, 34, almost 3,500 square feet. You did some electrical upgrades in there a few years ago. What we're finding here, and this is the first 5 that you're going to see, most of these 5s have to do with moisture getting into the buildings. In this case, it happens to be through the roof. You're starting to see some staining, some things that are causing enough attention that you really want to address that roof leak fairly soon. We got things like insulating the hot water lines, interior renovations. All of the facilities that we see out here at the park, they don't have ADA accessible restroom facilities. Those are probably some of the biggest expenses you're going to see at all of these when we go through them one by one. Improve ventilation, air, increase the electric service. Again, when these facilities were done, they weren't necessarily planned for all the electrical loads and the computers and the offices and things that we have in there now. So $275,000 roughly in improvements. There was a request for an addition that would expand some office space and the signage shop area. So we've broken out that number alongside it. Okay. Public Works Building, then we call it 2A, which is by the arrow there. It's about 40 years old. About 3,000 square feet, if you would. Here is probably the biggest number 5 that you're going to see in our whole report, which has to do with the water that's infiltrating the building. This building is built up into the hillside, and water is coming down the hill. What our structural engineer saw was that the water is getting into the wood sill plates and is starting to rot that away. So we need to address that. It's going to be a significant issue for you soon if you don't address it. So we've got costs included in here to regrade, to add some drainage, as well as to replace some of those structural members that are built in there. We ought to think about a new roof on there. Again, ADA upgrades and bathrooms are a big piece of it. And again, this one starts to get in that threshold if we're at about $500,000 of improvements, $980,000, $1 million to replace. So it's something to think about as you go one way or the other. Oops. Ooh, I think We both clicked. So that's that one, okay. So then 2B is the fairly new building, 7 years old, about 2,700 square feet. There are a few things that we could do here. There really wasn't much that needed to be addressed. We can upgrade the electric service a little bit. If you wanted to, you could install occupancy sensors in the spaces so that the lights go off when folks aren't around. Better thermostats to control the air, control the heaters the same way. Not a lot on this facility. It's doing great for you. Your salt storage building, it is what it is. It's functioning well for you. A couple of things that we could do if you wanted is to, at some point, if all the salt is ever out of there, you might want to seal up that floor. As you all know, salt and concrete don't go well together. Everybody does it just the same way you're doing. So over time, though, eventually that slab will wear out a little bit. So we had a little bit of electrical upgrade and then to seal that floor if you chose to go that way. Not too much here. Okay, so firehouse number 1, 40 years old. This building is starting to get to the end of its useful life. About 12,000 square feet. You did some renovations in the mid-'80s. Catch up my notes here. One of the things that my specialty fire consultant noted about this building is that layout and design of fire facilities have changed since this was done many years ago. One of the things that they always look at is how quickly folks can get from bunk to the fire truck and roll away, okay? And they start looking for 90-degree turns, and every time someone has to make a 90-degree turn, it slows us down, slows down our response time. So what they're saying is that essentially when you have bunks on the second floor like this one does, it's not conducive to a fast rollout, although your folks are doing an excellent job when you look at their times. What they're saying is this building doesn't lend itself very well to really thinking about renovation. Some of the things that are needed are decontamination areas. Your folks, your EMS, and a lot of your folks deal with some hazardous materials just in the day-to-day activities. They need a place to wash that off that's separate from everybody else. Right now, they're coming into the common shower areas and having to do that, and that's just not what the ideal circumstance there. So as we looked at this, a number of things that we looked at. If you're going to keep this facility, it needs renovation, it needs addition of space. What we might look at is bringing bunks down to the main floor. Maybe the upper floor is office and recreation and other type lounge spaces. So we included that in our cost, upgrading all the heating and electric, the lighting, the electrical itself, installed a sprinkler system, which the building doesn't have, upgrading your generator. And then there are a few other things about the outside. This is about a $3 million addition renovation. And this is, again, one where you're going to be on the point where you have to decide, is it better just to replace this facility? Okay?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
One thing that you've mentioned a few times going through here is the low-flow plumbing fixtures.
Yes, sir.
And the tankless water heaters. Is there any, can you help us with like a payback on that?
The payback on the low-flow fixtures is fairly quick. It's probably 3 to 4 years. The tankless is probably 7 to 8 is what's been my experience. That's why they're in sort of the category 2 areas there. They are things that our current design code would say we would do. But they're not have-tos right now. Everything's functioning fine. If you were to renovate the building, then we would go ahead and do these types of things. But it's not something that code's dictating you have to go back and do right now.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay. What you all call firehouse number 2 in your park storage, again, it's just sort of an older building here. It's about 50 years old. It's mostly used for meeting space and storage. The only issue that we have with this one is if You're going to continue to have meeting space in there. By code, we should have a firewall between meeting and storage. And so that's the biggest cost that we have as part of this, is just creating that firewall between the two different occupancy uses, okay? Still not too much cost in this building, and I wouldn't recommend we put a lot of money into this building, but it's serving you for storage and some fairly inexpensive meeting space. Lastly, the firehouse number 3, 25 years old, just under 9,000 square feet. Had a upgrade in 2013. This building is doing fairly well. We had the same consultants look at this building in particular. A few things that, again, they noted were things like the decontamination area, a dedicated storage area, but also talking about reworking the bunk area, again, so to make some of that flow a little better for our response times. But all in all, given the age of this building, it's holding up fairly well and could have a very little bit of money put into it and continue to serve you for a good while. Before I move to the next section, any questions? Again, this is a lot. Yeah, yes.
So in the Firehouse 1, the decontamination addition wasn't a separate line item? Was it rolled into?
It was rolled into that addition.
The addition?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Because I went through those very fast, so. Okay. Well, if you wouldn't mind then, Sherry, we'll keep going. So next, I had, again, the specialized consultant come out of Michigan and evaluate your current fire stations, the 2 facilities, and give us their opinion on how they're servicing the community. Is there anything that they see to bring to your attention? So they looked at a number of different things, and I'm going to walk through these. This is a little more detailed, so stop me if you have questions, if you would. So the current stations, as you all know, are 1 and 3. To the north, and I'll call south just for ease of use. One of the things that's not going to surprise you all, but makes it an interesting challenge for your fire service, is just the shape of your city limits, okay? This barbell that we have here with the skinny middle, okay? So one of the things that you all have wisely done, and we hope that you continue to do, is the automatic aid agreements that you have with the surrounding cities. That's good. That is greatly helping you, and we suggest that you continue to maintain those as you go forward. So this first image is just looking at the density of where the population is in the city. It's not going to surprise you. The heavy blue is the heaviest population. As we go further away from the middle, then that density decreases into residential and industrial areas. You all, the past census has shown roughly about 5.6% growth in the community. And it seems to be happening in the extreme south and the extreme north. So that's where the density is growing in those yellow areas as you go forward, okay? The consultants also looked at your current zoning, not what the current uses are, but the current zoning, because those are the potential uses that you would allow in those areas. So just another way of looking at the activities. What you see in the red there are the high hazard, highest risk areas, not necessarily hazard, but these are hotels, schools, industrial areas, residential, shopping centers, lumber yards, things with a lot of people or things that could combust fairly quickly. And they're primarily, as you can see with the reds there, in the northern part of the city, near the interstate and the airport. Okay? This is probably the most specific image that you want to look at. And this is looking at the number of calls and where those calls are originating from. So this is where your fire service is spending the majority of its time. The darker the red, the more calls that are made there. Till we get to the blue, which are the lesser number of calls. And one of the things that we do want to point out, again, is you're not surprised, this is mostly near the interstate and near your industrial areas. But all of these intensities, they don't necessarily mean an equal distribution of demand for your services, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Next for me, please. So then what the folks did is look at a couple of different standards. Now, I want to be clear that when we talk about the ISO, the Insurance Services Office, and then in a few minutes, the National Fire Protection Association, both of these are recommendations. They are not requirements. You're not required to meet these, but this is sort of an evaluation tool put out by two separate groups to help you analyze how you're doing, okay? So with ISO, one of the things that they look at is how quickly and what the distance is from our stations for the first engine to roll out within a mile and a half. And the heavy purple lines that you see are around fire station number 1, fire station number 3. So that's the first image. Then the next image overlays that with 2.5 miles for the ladder truck, which is based in number 1. So that gives you a quick view of travel distance from the station serving the areas of the community. Okay, next one. They also evaluated response time, which is what the NFPA wants to look at. And what you'll see there are the 4 and the 8-minute markers. What this graph shows, there's a lot of information here. I won't get lost in this. But what I want you to see is all the blue bars that go up and down. Those are your response times for 2015, okay? And that graph looks the way that it should. You're going to see that most of your response times are falling in that 4 minute, certainly within the 8. Very few exceptional items fall outside the 8-minute response time, which is where you want to be. Okay? Next one. And so again, looking at that 4-minute travel, this is again based around Fire Station 1 in the north, Fire Station 3 in the south. We again highlighted the roads and what it would take, how far that would go within the 4 minutes of travel. And you see you get a good bit of coverage in the city, but it's not extensive. Go to my next slide. Then you'll see the benefit of these mutual aid agreements and how the connecting and surrounding fire districts start to fill in most of the city because of those aid agreements. So everyone is benefiting from that. Your adjacent communities from your service and vice versa. So this gives you a much better idea of the available coverage with the 2 fire stations, but alongside of that with your mutual aid agreements. Okay? So what our specialist consultants came back with and said is essentially, you know, folks, you're doing a good job. Ideally, you would maintain the 2 fire stations because of the coverage. You would maintain those mutual aid agreements with the surrounding cities, keeping the staffing and their ability to cover each other and other surrounding areas. And then they also came to the same conclusion about Fire Station 1. If you consider that it's reached the end of its reasonable lifespan, and we all think it may be there, if you think about replacing it, ideally, maybe you shift the location a little bit more to the northeast. It might get a little more better coverage. That's a little difficult question in terms of what land might be available. That might be another topic of discussion. Okay? One last little bit then, one of the alternatives that we were just asked to investigate for you is you've had 2 fire stations for a long time. Could you get by with 1? Okay? And the consultants went back, took a look at that. The issue is essentially if you went with 1, remember all those images that we saw before, the concentration is to the north in terms of the number of calls and the high intensity areas. So logically you would put 1 there, but what you'll see then in this map is that most of the southern part is not in a quick 4-minute response time. Okay? So we want to take a look at that. It's not our call to make, but they are quite concerned with the response time to the south if you ever decided to consolidate to one, okay? I think that's pretty straightforward. So, again, that's just what I talked about. Some of the implications, you know, one of the things that they do want us to stress is that even if you went to one station, you wouldn't necessarily look at reducing staff. You still need the same staff you have to provide the same coverage that you're providing now. So you might save a facility building, but you wouldn't necessarily be looking to cut staff to provide the same services that you are today. Okay? And that's it, folks. I'll take your questions, and thank you again for this opportunity. We were quite delighted to help you all out, and wish you all the best with moving forward with this.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any questions or comments? Go ahead, Corinne.
When you were saying north, I don't even know if it's working, northeast, are you thinking more like that way or this way?
Let me get turned around here.
Dixie Highway, okay,
Right.
all right,
Okay, so we're going that way,
okay,
right?
okay,
Just a little bit further in.
okay, thanks.
When I Googled it, if you do 0.75 miles to northeast, it's about Crescent Springs Avenue.
Okay.
Like right by the lumberyard.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Good job.
I see Mr. Myers here, who is the chair of the committee that we created to look over this data. And I know that the committee has had the information for about a week now. Did you want to say anything about it? Okay.
So the committee actually met to go through this. We walked through a good portion of it today. And when we looked at it, we were happy to see some of the results that we saw here. One, that, you know, 2 fire stations was the right thing for the city. I think we knew that, so it was good to reaffirm that. When we were looking at, you know, what we thought we were tasked to do and provide a recommendation, we really were looking at a couple of those critical needs, and it was, I guess, a relief to see only a few 4s and 5s. So as we were discussing, you know, what we wanted to recommend for council to take forward was to, as the immediate need, address those 4s and 5s, and primarily driven with the issues with the Public Works 2A building, the one that actually has some damage. There's some concerns that there could be some life safety issues should there be a failure in the building. So we thought that that was really the immediate need. And then, but that is really looking at that in totality, not necessarily just doing the repairs, but actually going back and looking at that building and what would it take to relocate it. Does it make sense to stay on the railroad property or completely move that Public Works campus? But really driven around that and attaching those pieces that made sense to carry along with it. And it will be an expensive project, and, you know, in excess of $1 million. But it made sense to address those pieces first, as well as some of the other enhancements to both this facility and a few of the other small 4 and 5 enhancements. The recommendation for the rest of the items would be for the Public Works group to take that forward, and similar to what was done with the roads program, where there's some continuous development, figure out how those pieces work into that, understanding that anything with the fire facility would go into that long-term planning process. But while there are some needs there, there's not as urgent as the fire or the Public Works building. Questions for me?
Mayor, I'd like to know who's on this committee. This isn't the committee that was originally.
Yeah, it's still the same as the original committee, and I'm glad you brought that up because Mr. Cahill had another idea on that. But it was Mr. Meyer, Mr. Cahill, Chief Whitaker, Mr. Bogard, and then 2 citizens, Mrs. Dietz and Mrs. Preziosi.
Randy was on that.
Yes, I was appointed to
were
the
on that?
committee, but I wasn't given notice of this last meeting.
Okay. Well, that's my mistake then. I apologize. And that's actually what Mr. Cahill was bringing up, that since there is a lot of the financial portions of this, that you should be included in the committee as well.
If you had doubt about that, it might have been a good idea to ask me.
Okay, thanks. Duly noted.
Yeah, I have a question, and I don't know who would answer it, but I noticed that we have, let's see, what's that number? 3 million? No, that can't be right. Is that right? 3 million for the fire station number 1? Okay. I know at one time we talked about replacing that building with the Board of Education, with the schools. And I was just wondering, did we get an estimate on how much that would cost?
Yes, we did.
Okay.
It was around the $7 million mark.
7 million.
The way it was designed with the facilities that the school board needed and we needed, it was right at about $7 million.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have an elevator over there in the fire building, and the Board of Education too. But I remembered we had done it, but I didn't remember what the cost was, and that, I don't know if that's a recent number or if it's going way back.
It's within the last 3 years.
Okay.
So it's why I was in this office, so it was
good
within the 3
enough.
years, right?
Yeah, I was just curious, because as he was saying before, sometimes by the time you renovate everything, you know, and you're gonna have to keep up with everything, it might be easier just to go and jump into something.
And the issue with that one was simply the fact that most of that land that's around that firehouse is owned by the Board of Education.
Right.
We have very little on okay, whichever side that is. I'm going to say it's the east side. Just one row of parking, and then the rest of the parking lot belongs to the Board of Education. All the land behind the firehouse belongs to the Board of Education. And that's what, you know, I think really played into a lot of this cost, and then their needs, because the building addition was gonna build them a new board meeting room, build them some more office space, and do some things like that. So there were a lot of other costs that were involved with that, that made it that high. We also did another one. We did another one for down on Houston Road. When we were talking about relocating it down there,
Right.
That number was just a little bit over $4 million. So it was much, I guess, it was less expensive to do that, much more, I think, you know, feasible for us to look at Houston Road and do that. But then the fire department, when we got into those talks, didn't want to move down there because it added about a minute to that response time, where in fact this study has shown us the calls are further northeast than that being on that side, so it would have moved them even further away from that. So that location probably would not be a very good location to move that firehouse.
I've got a question I think probably for Mr. Murphy would be best. On some buildings, you have categorized the ADA lack of compliance issues as like a 2 or a 3, and in some it's a 4 or 5. Is that, what's the rationale there?
It truly had to do with the awful condition of some of your bathroom facilities they're not very pleasant, and it would be nice to get those, so we bumped those up a little bit higher. Others are just more code upgrade type issues, so that was really the qualifier between the two.
Okay, so there was no like assessment as to how much public use certain buildings, and that would rank it higher or lower on ADA compliance?
That was not the approach that we took, no.
Okay.
No, sir.
I have one other question while you're up there.
Yes,
and thank you for coming out this evening.
Absolutely.
And being a part of this. In the course of this study being produced, legislation changed the requirement of prevailing wage rates. Do these numbers include prevailing wage rates or not?
They include prevailing wage rates.
Okay, good.
And here's what I'm telling all my clients, if I can just lead on with that, is we're still taking a wait-and-see approach on what the removal of the wage rates will actually do. We don't anticipate very swift changes to those, because you keep in mind there are a number of large projects that were awarded with wage rates. If I have the possibility of working on a wage rate project or one without, I know where I'm going to go, right? So we don't see necessarily a very quick and immediate drop-off. I've been talking with folks at Division Engineering in Frankfurt. We have several projects ongoing with them. They are advising their clients the same thing. You know, talk to us a year from now, we might see a difference. But right now, you ought to assume that you're competing against wage weight projects that are under construction, and you're going to be trying to match those costs.
Okay.
It's a fair question, and I'm getting it a lot, so.
Sure, yeah. Well, it's a massive amount of data. Someone have a hand up?
Yeah. I have another question. Earlier in the, you said we needed LED lights, and it was a significant amount of money to change that over. Do you have a cost savings on the LED lights?
Those, it depends on the age of the old lights, the types of ballasts, whether they're old fluorescent fixtures. The oldest fluorescent fixtures, the LED change-out is 4 to 5, 6 years. No more than 7 to 8 years is what we're typically seeing. In all of my school districts, I'm doing that now because the cost of LEDs is almost on par with just replacing it with fluorescent. So you would never make that trade-off. The LED light is so much better and so much more cost-effective.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Folks, thank you all. It's been our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Jerry, thank you.
So, Mayor, we'd like to keep this back in committee and look at some prioritizations on this. So maybe put this back into Public Works. We can take a look and see what we need to do. I think we're going to need some more information on what, at the end of the road, what are we going to do? Is this do we need to remove this, or do we need, remove this from the site or actually replace it? Because I think that will be a concern, as we may be able to address some of the drainage issues, but as Mr. Bogart put it earlier, it is in a bowl where this place sits, so.
So along with that, when we do the March budget meeting, this past year, we had a $500,000 line item in the budget as implementation of this plan. Of course, we haven't spent any of that money yet, and carrying over, and probably won't, the remaining of this budget year. So carrying over to 18, we need to figure out a number to put in there for implementation of this plan. So I think those conversations, need to be held as quickly as possible. For that, we could talk about it maybe a little with the budget retreat on the 4th of March, or however we want to look. But we need to put some kind of number in there, so just keep that in mind when we're doing the budget for this upcoming year. Yes, sir.
How long is our contract on the property over there to Public Works?
Public Works, it actually expires in May of this year.
So do we want to, are we going to make sure we have a 99-year contract?
Well, okay, so.
Or build something on it for $5 million that we don't.
Right, that's the question. So the railroad, we just redid the railroad park the end of last year, last fall. And at that point in time, they were giving us 5-year contracts with 3 extensions. So in essence, it was, well, actually 2 extensions. It actually went out to 15 years. So the initial term plus 2 more. So we got 15 years on the railroad park. Well, sometime between the fall and now, when I've met with the railroad representative and have had email conversations and back with him, they now have gone to a 3-year with 2. So you can only get 9 years.
Wow. Ooh, that's a
Now,
big gamble.
they'll tell you that they have never kicked off a corporate client and or a city or government for any of their property if they've made these long-term investments in the property. But again, that's a chance and that's a question that this council is going to have to answer of whether or not we have, we need to be putting this kind of money in any of the facilities to put it on railroad property, our property that we don't own. So we're going to go ahead. We're probably going to have to go ahead and sign the May extension for that 3 years, because we couldn't get anything built or land purchased and moved anywhere else for that 3 years.
Right.
And then you'd be stuck with that for 3 years. That payment's $9,100 a year is what the new contract is going to be. It went up from 78, I believe, to 91. So there was a significant increase. But the last one was signed 15 years ago. So it just did come up, so.
Thank you.
We tried. I tried my best to get them to do long-term with 99. They just won't do it any longer. Well, I don't think we ever, well, I was under the impression that we had a 99-year lease on some of that. We never did have.
Is that right?
So that we can find. They've always been those term ones. So, like I said, the last one was just the 15 ones before. I think the other one was 10 and 10. So it went 10 years and then went out to 20, and now they cut that back to 5. Now they're cutting it back to 3.
Is there any way to find out if the railroad's taken any property from anybody, ever?
I don't know how you would go about doing that. I mean, we could search it somehow.
I mean, the railroad facility is so large that it'd be almost impossible to do. Certainly wouldn't be worth the time.
No, that's fine. I just thought I'd ask.
And this is something else. Even between the time that we were negotiating with them in the fall for the railroad park into January, when we just started having conversations about public works, our agent changed. And it took us for a long time when Sherry and I were trying to find it. Going back, finally got a hold of the very first guy that did it. He's no longer in property and doing something. So those property managers change a lot. And this guy is from Atlanta, Georgia. He's got the whole state of Kentucky. I think he's got Kentucky, maybe Tennessee, and another state. I'm not sure if it's Georgia or not, but so they change a lot. So I mean
We'll have to look at it as we go.
That is,
Right.
that's even more scary.
Mm-hmm.
Mark,
Yeah.
that 9100, that was for the Public Works.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, how much are we paying for the depot land?
It's less.
It's less.
Yeah, it's around that. I think it was like it was 45. Yeah, I think it was 45, and it might have went up to 5, or it's right at 48, something right in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's per year?
Yes. Yeah. And it's not a great expense when you're looking at leasing land and doing those kind of things. I mean, the airport's leasing 1,000 acres out there. I mean, that's what they're doing. They're not selling that land. They're leasing that land to all those developers, but they're probably long-term leases. It's really not that much of an expense. The expense is going to be into improving these facilities and spending all that money. That's the decision of whether you're going to spend, taxpayer dollars for the long term on property that's not yours.
Right.
That's the decision. And then finding another location, we talked about that in the committee this afternoon a little bit, about finding that, where do you find those locations? That's going to be difficult, but this gives us some time to look at that and see, but you can't put $500,000 into that building that in Public Works when you could build the whole new building for, $980,000 or $1 million, double the money, because then what's going to happen to it next?
Right, exactly.
So there's some decisions and talk that this committee needs to have.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's scary when we look at all the costs all at once. The next thing, too, that we're going to talk about a little bit is the sidewalk repairs as well. These problems didn't just develop upon the study being done. These are problems that have existed for a long time. It doesn't mean that everything has to get fixed right now. The important part is that we begin a schedule that we can start to address the items, and know that they're being taken care of over time. Mm-hmm. It's going to be the same way. So is there any more items is there any more discussion on the facilities? Can we move on to the sidewalks?
Yep.
Okay. Has everybody seen? I know a few of these got distributed. I don't think we distributed them to everybody. But the company that we had hired to do the survey, Precision Cutting, or Concrete Cutting, had put together a couple options addressing all of the sidewalk issues that they can address. So basically shaving down the high spots in the concrete. What this does not address is if portions of the concrete have to be pulled out and replaced completely. And this is everything from I-75 to Dixie Highway inside the city of Erlanger. And they've given us two options. And I think we've looked at this before. So shaving everything from 1/4 inch to 2 inches they have a cost of $107, or let's just call it $108,000 for all those repairs. If we raise that limit to more of a 5/8 inch to 2 inch, so a little over a 1/2 inch to 2 inches instead of the 1/4 inch, the cost of the corrections are more like around $80,000. So it's a savings. The problem is that it's still a trip hazard at 5/8 of an inch. And if it's something, made him upset. He does not like trip hazards.
You didn't like that much?
Wait a minute, let me go for my glass case again. Okay, now.
Yeah, there you go.
Who's next?
So, you know, I think the right thing to do would be to get rid of those trip hazards, you know, for the additional, you know, let's say $28,000, you know, we might as well get as much of it corrected as possible while we're doing it. It's the same kind of thing, though. I mean, we're going to have to start a program where we dedicate some, you know, some portion of money each year to making these corrections. This is just looking at one portion of the city. You know, maybe we could say it's about 1/3 of the city. It's also probably looking at some of the worst sidewalks in the city, too. So, so I'm sorry we don't have more of a formal presentation on that this evening, but just starting to try to share some of the information that's come to us here more recently.
So currently, were you just talking about one phase of this? Because I'm looking at $150,000 to $190,000 for all 3 phases.
Yeah, I think, so that includes if we call it the Stevenson corridor or the handle of the dumbbell, like Mr. Murphy would have said.
Yeah. So, and looking at this, and I guess the question comes up right now, are we investing this money into it? Are we going to use the existing ordinance, which means the homeowner is responsible for that sidewalk?
Yeah, this is really the discussion that we need to have. I mean, we need to weigh in on this. I mean, I'd like to hear from as many of you as possible. So right now, we've got an ordinance that says that the property owner is responsible for the sidewalk. It's not happening. You know, it happens in some areas. You do see some homeowners that do go out and replace their sidewalk, but a majority of it is not. Legally, it could fall back on the city. You know, it's in the public right of way. It was installed by, a lot of them were installed by the city. You know, case law would say that the city is responsible. So do we take care of something that we're going to be responsible for? Or do we try to rely on the ordinance that